Do you know something strange about certain kinds of children? Picture this: you're 8 years old, sitting at the kitchen table with your homework spread out in front of you. Your pencil hovers over the page, but you're not really looking at the math problems. You're listening. Your father's footsteps in the hallway, the particular way your mother sets down her coffee cup, the silence that stretches just a little too long between their sentences. Your body knows something is wrong before your mind can name it. Your chest tightens, your stomach drops, and you start calculating not fractions, but words. What can you say to make this better? What joke might lighten the air? How can you become small enough, useful enough, pleasant enough to pull the tension out of the room like a splinter? Maybe you're someone who learned to read a room before you could read a book. Someone who became fluent in the language of other people's moods, other people's needs, other people's barely contained rage or sadness or disappointment. So here's the question: why do some children become translators of other people's anger? Why do they learn to carry emotional weight that was never meant for their small shoulders? It's easy to assume that these children, the ones adults call so mature for their age, an old soul, wise beyond their years, are simply naturally empathetic, naturally responsible, natural helpers. But that's not the full picture. Because beneath those compliments is a child who stopped being a child. Beneath the surface of that maturity is someone who learned that their value depends on their ability to manage other people's emotions, that their safety depends on their vigilance, that love is something you earn by making yourself useful. Society celebrates the peacekeeper child. Teachers praise them, relatives marvel at them, but rarely does anyone ask what they sacrificed to become that way. Rarely does anyone wonder what happens to a nervous system that learns, year after year, that it's responsible for maintaining everyone else's equilibrium. This isn't about being helpful. This is about survival. This is about a child who became a thermostat for other people's emotions before they even understood their own. Psychologists have found something fascinating about children who take on this role. They're studying what happens when the normal parent-child relationship gets quietly inverted, when a child starts providing emotional support, conflict resolution, and stability to their family instead of receiving it. They call this parentification, specifically emotional parentification. And here's what they've discovered. These children develop a very specific set of traits, not randomly, not because they're just wired that way, but because their environment demanded it. The first trait is hypervigilance. You learn to read micro-expressions like a second language. The tightness around your mother's eyes means she's about to cry. The way your father's jaw clenches means an argument is building. The particular quality of silence in the house tells you whether you can relax or whether you need to be on alert. Your nervous system becomes a finely tuned instrument for detecting emotional weather patterns. The second trait is preemptive problem solving. You don't wait for conflict to erupt. You intervene before it happens. You distract, you redirect, you perform. You tell a joke when tension rises. You change the subject when dangerous topics emerge. You become the one who mediates between your parents, or protects your younger siblings, or manages your parents' mood swings. You fix things before they break, because broken things in your house feel dangerous. The third trait is emotional shape-shifting. You learn to become what the room needs. If your father is angry, you become soothing. If your mother is sad, you become cheerful. If everyone is fighting, you become invisible. You develop 100 versions of yourself, each one calibrated to defuse, to please, to stabilize. And here's what people don't understand. Silence is not emptiness, it's control. When you're quiet, when you're easy, when you're no trouble at all, you're not absent, you're hyper-aware, you're monitoring, calculating, managing. You didn't choose to become fluent in tension. You absorbed it the way lungs absorb air because you had to breathe. So how does this happen? How does a child transform into the family's emotional support system? Sometimes it's obvious. There's overt conflict, yelling, fighting, violence. The child steps in because someone has to, and the adults clearly aren't capable. But more often, it's quieter than that, more insidious. It might be chronic low-level tension that never quite erupts, but never quite resolves. It might be a parent struggling with depression or anxiety who leans on the child for comfort. It might be intense sibling rivalry that the child learns to mediate. It might be a household where emotions are treated as problems to be managed rather than experiences to be felt. The progression is gradual. First, you notice things. You're perceptive, sensitive to the emotional currents in your home. Then you start intervening in small ways. You make your mom laugh when she's having a hard day. You diffuse an argument between your siblings, and it works. The tension eases. You get praised for being mature, for being helpful, for being such a good kid. So you do it again and again, and slowly, without anyone explicitly asking you to, it becomes your job. You become the mediator who translates between family members who won't talk to each other directly. You become the mood lifter who has to be cheerful so everyone else can feel okay. You become the invisible shock absorber who takes in everyone's stress and somehow has to process it alone. You become the family's emotional translator, the one who understands what everyone needs even when they can't articulate it themselves. And here's the thing that needs to be said. This didn't happen because you were special. It didn't happen because you were naturally gifted at emotional labor. It happened because you were small and scared and paying attention. It happened because children are adaptive creatures who will do whatever they need to do to survive. And in your house, survival meant learning to manage other people's feelings before they spiraled into something worse. You became the peacekeeper not because you chose it, but because the alternative felt too dangerous. People see your strength. They see someone who's calm in crisis, who's good with conflict, who's remarkably attuned to others. They see maturity, reliability, someone who really has it together. They don't see the cost. They don't see the constant monitoring, the part of your brain that's always scanning for signs of distress in others, always running scenarios, always prepared to intervene. They don't see the exhaustion that comes from never fully relaxing, because relaxing means you might miss something, and missing something might mean disaster. They don't see how you've learned to make yourself so small, so accommodating, so understanding, that your own needs barely register anymore. There's a concept in trauma psychology that doesn't get talked about enough. Most people know about fight, flight, and freeze, the ways we respond to threat. But there's a fourth response, fawn. The fawn response is about appeasing. It's about making yourself useful, likable, indispensable to the source of potential threat. It's about surviving by becoming what others need. And that's what you learned. Not because you encountered a single traumatic event, but because your nervous system was shaped by chronic unpredictability, by walking on eggshells, by never quite knowing which version of your parents you'd get, which mood would dominate the house, whether today would be calm or catastrophic. There's another term psychologists use, emotional enmeshment. It means the boundaries between your feelings and someone else's feelings have become blurred, permeable, almost non-existent. When your mother is anxious, you're anxious. When your father is angry, you feel responsible. You've absorbed the idea that you're not a separate person with separate emotions, you're part of a system, and your job is to keep that system stable. So what's the cost? You lose track of your own needs. You develop a relationship with your own anger that's complicated, suppressed, because anger might destabilize things, and that's not allowed. You enter relationships as an adult where you're always the giver, always the one doing the emotional labor, and you don't even notice it's happening because it feels normal. It feels like love. You became so good at preventing storms that you forgot you're allowed to have weather of your own. And this doesn't just disappear when you grow up. The patterns persist. They show up in ways you might not even connect to your childhood. You over-apologize for things that aren't your fault, for taking up space, for having needs. "I'm sorry" becomes punctuation, a reflexive way of making yourself smaller, less threatening, easier to deal with. You struggle with boundaries. Setting a boundary feels violent, aggressive, mean, because in your childhood, boundaries might have escalated conflict, and escalating conflict was dangerous. So you say yes when you mean no. You tolerate treatment you shouldn't tolerate. You prioritize everyone else's comfort over your own. You might find yourself attracted to emotionally unavailable or volatile people. And this seems contradictory. Why would someone who spent their childhood managing chaos seek it out as an adult? But here's the truth. Familiar equals safe, even when familiar is painful. You know how to navigate emotional unpredictability. You're good at it. Stable, consistent love can actually feel uncomfortable because you don't know what role to play. You don't know how to just receive without performing. And there's guilt. Chronic, persistent guilt whenever you prioritize yourself. Taking time alone feels selfish. Saying no feels cruel. Expressing your own needs feels like a betrayal of your core identity, because your identity was built on being low maintenance, being helpful, being the one who makes things easier for everyone else. Here's what's fascinating from a neuroscience perspective. Studies using brain imaging show that people with histories of chronic childhood stress have different patterns of neural activation. Your amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, is more reactive. Your nervous system remains primed for conflict detection even when you're objectively safe. You're not being too sensitive. Your nervous system is doing exactly what it was trained to do: survive by predicting and managing other people's emotions. You carry a hypervigilance that was once protective, but now feels like a weight you can't put down. Here's the paradox that many peacekeepers face. You crave deep connection, but relationships feel like assignments. You want intimacy, but you don't know how to receive it without immediately trying to manage it, fix it, or earn it. You might have many people in your life who feel close to you, they confide in you, they rely on you, they value your presence. But if someone asked you, do you feel close to anyone? That's a harder question, because closeness for you has always been conditional. It's been based on your utility, on your emotional labor, on your ability to be what someone else needs. There's a concept psychologists call psychological ownership. It's when you feel personally responsible for fixing problems that aren't yours, for managing outcomes you don't control, for carrying weight that someone else should be carrying. And as a peacekeeper, you have an overdeveloped sense of psychological ownership. Your parents' marriage, somehow your responsibility. Your siblings' struggles, yours to fix. Your friend's crisis, you're on it even at your own expense. But here's the question that might sting a little. When was the last time someone held space for your anger, for your mess, for your unfiltered, inconvenient, complicated needs? When was the last time you felt safe enough to be difficult? Because that's what you learn to suppress. The difficult parts, the messy parts, the parts that might burden someone else or create tension. You learn to process your pain privately, quietly, without ever asking anyone to help you carry it. You know how to be intimate with other people's emotions, but letting someone be intimate with yours that feels exposing, dangerous, wrong somehow. And maybe this shows up in your relationships with romantic partners. You attract people who need you because need is a language you speak fluently, but you struggle with partners who want to care for you, who want you to be vulnerable, who want access to the parts of yourself you learn to hide. Equal partnership feels foreign. You don't know how to let someone share the load when you've spent your whole life being the load bearer. The invisible wall isn't keeping people out. It's keeping you locked in a role you learned so young you think it's who you are. But let's talk about what you did gain, because it's not all loss, it's not all damage. You developed real skills. Deep empathy, the ability to understand what someone is feeling even when they can't articulate it. Pattern recognition, you can read group dynamics, predict conflict, sense what's left unsaid. Emotional intelligence, you understand the complexity of human emotion in ways many people never will. These are real gifts. They make you a good friend, a supportive partner, a valuable team member. They give you insight that others lack. But here's the complication. These gifts were born from necessity, not choice. You didn't develop empathy because you had the luxury to explore emotional depth. You developed it because your survival depended on accurately reading and responding to other people's emotional states. Your skills came at a cost: your childhood, your sense of safety, your ability to prioritize your own needs. So the question isn't whether you should erase who you became. You can't erase it. It's woven into you. The question is, can you transform how you relate to these patterns? Can you choose, for the first time, what you want to keep and what you want to release? Researchers studying post-traumatic growth have found something interesting. People who experienced adversity in childhood don't just carry wounds, they also often develop capacities for meaning-making, compassion, and resilience that can be profound. But that growth happens not by denying the wound, and not by staying stuck in the wound. It happens by acknowledging both the harm and the strength, the loss and the gain, the child who adapted and the adult who gets to choose. Maybe the goal isn't to stop being empathetic. Maybe it's to direct that empathy toward yourself with the same generosity you've always offered others. Maybe the goal isn't to eliminate your ability to read people. Maybe it's to use that skill to recognize when someone is actually safe, when you can stop managing and start receiving. Maybe you don't need to become someone different. Maybe you need to become someone who knows that your worth isn't measured by how much emotional labor you provide, that you're allowed to need support without earning it, that being loved doesn't require being useful. So let me say this clearly, this doesn't mean you're codependent. It doesn't mean you're broken. It doesn't mean there's something fundamentally wrong with you that needs to be fixed. It means you were a child who did what children do: they adapt, they survive, they become whoever they need to become to feel safe in their environment. Your sensitivity isn't a flaw. It's evidence of how hard you work to keep yourself safe. Your ability to read people isn't weakness, it's a survival skill you developed with incredible precision. Your caretaking isn't pathology, it's a response to an environment that asked too much of you too soon. And here's what needs to be said: you're allowed to stop. You're allowed to stop managing other people's emotions. You're allowed to stop being the one who always understands, always forgives, always adapts. You're allowed to have boundaries without justifying them. You're allowed to be difficult, messy, needy, too much. You're allowed to be the person who walks away from relationships that require you to stay small. You're allowed to disappoint people who have come to expect your endless accommodation. You're allowed to discover who you are when you're not performing the role of peacekeeper. This doesn't happen overnight. You can't just decide to stop being hypervigilant and have your nervous system comply. But you can start recognizing the pattern. You can start noticing when you're about to apologize for something that isn't your fault and pause. You can start asking yourself, whose emotion am I managing right now? Is this actually my responsibility? You can start practicing something radical, letting other people be responsible for their own feelings, letting conflict exist without immediately trying to resolve it, trusting that you're allowed to just be without performing or producing or fixing. Think about that child again, the one sitting at the kitchen table, listening to footsteps, calculating words. The child was doing their best with impossible circumstances. That child found a way to survive. That child deserves so much compassion. And that child is still in you, still vigilant, still carrying the belief that love is conditional, that safety requires vigilance, that your value is measured by your usefulness. But here's what that child didn't know and what you can learn now. You survived by becoming essential, by making yourself indispensable, by proving your worth through emotional labor. But you can rest by remembering you already are. You already are worthy. You already are valuable, not because of what you do for others, but because you exist. So the next time you feel that familiar pull to smooth things over, to make yourself smaller, to fix what someone else broke, to absorb someone else's anger or grief or disappointment, pause, breathe, and ask yourself, what would it feel like to let someone else hold this? What would it feel like to believe that you're allowed to take up space without earning it? You were never the problem that needed solving. You were the child who deserved to just be a child. And even now, even as an adult carrying all those years of careful vigilance and earned maturity and learned responsibility, you still deserve softness. You still deserve rest. You still deserve to be loved not for what you provide, but for who you are.